When Dame Diana Rigg passed away in 2020, her Hampstead home in London, a dignified Georgian townhouse with ivy climbing up its brick façade, was sold quietly a year later. The buyers, a middle-aged couple named Andrew and Louise, were drawn to the elegance of the place, with its high ceilings, old fireplaces, and a small walled garden. They thought they were buying history, not inheriting it. From the beginning, the house had an unusual stillness. Neighbors warned them it had an atmosphere. But in Hampstead, people often spoke poetically about old homes. The couple dismissed it until the first winter night. Louise awoke around 3 a.m. to the sound of someone pacing on the hardwood floors of the upstairs corridor. At first she thought Andrew couldn't sleep, but when she turned, he was fast asleep beside her. She lay frozen, listening to slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped directly outside their bedroom door, and then faded as if someone had retreated. In the mornings, they would find odd disturbances. Books stacked neatly on the coffee table moved out of order. A vase in the hall turned slightly, curtains drawn when no one had touched them. Small things easy to dismiss. But Louise began keeping notes, and the pattern was undeniable. Neighbors added to their unease. One, an elderly woman across the street, remarked casually one day, "I used to see her standing at that upstairs window, even after she was gone, always watching, as if she couldn't leave the stage." Louise smiled politely but felt a chill. She hadn't told anyone about the shadows she'd glimpsed herself in that same window. As weeks turned to months, Andrew, normally the skeptic, confessed he'd heard a woman's voice in the study late one evening. A soft, theatrical whisper, like someone rehearsing lines. When he searched the room, it was empty, though the faint smell of perfume lingered, floral and unmistakably old-fashioned. The final straw came during a dinner party. Guests fell silent when, midway through conversation, a framed portrait of Diana Rigg slipped from the mantel and crashed onto the floor, though no one had touched it. The crash echoed unnaturally loud, and the glass splintered in such a way that Diana's eyes in the portrait seemed slashed across. The house had belonged to a great actress who lived and breathed performance. Some in Hampstead now whisper that she never truly left her stage. The new owners admit they rarely use the upstairs rooms anymore, especially at night. "We live here," Louise told a friend quietly, "but it doesn't feel like ours. It still feels like hers." By spring, Andrew and Louise had grown accustomed, if such a word could be used, to the peculiarities of the house. They no longer jumped at the quiet shifting of furniture or the faint creak of floorboards in the night. Instead, the disturbances had become woven into the fabric of daily life. Still, the tension between them was mounting, for each felt the other was withholding the full truth of what they experienced. The house itself seemed to respond differently depending on the hour. In the morning, sunlight filtered through tall sash windows, softening the edges of the old rooms. Louise would make tea in the kitchen, with its black and white tiled floor and polished counters, and try to imagine they were living the life they had envisioned: comfortable, historic, untouched by unease. But as dusk approached, and the shadows from the narrow streets stretched across the interior, the air seemed to grow denser, as though the walls themselves held their breath. One evening, while Andrew was away at a work dinner, Louise sat alone in the drawing room. She had left a lamp on low, its golden light casting gentle pools on the Persian rug. On the table beside her was a biography of Diana Rigg she had borrowed from the local library, a book she had told herself she'd read only to feel closer to the spirit of the neighborhood's history. Yet the words carried a strange weight in that house, as if they were not merely recounting a life, but summoning it. As she read about Rigg's early theater years, Louise became aware of a presence, something subtle at first, like a shift in air pressure. The curtains by the window stirred, though the glass panes were tightly shut. The faint perfume she had noticed before drifted across the room, sweet but sharp, like violets mixed with powder. Her skin prickled. Without lifting her eyes from the book, she felt someone had entered the room and was standing just beyond the edge of her vision. It took all her willpower to look up. For the briefest second, the reflection in the glass of the window seemed wrong. Her armchair doubled there. The lamp too, but behind her was not empty air. There was the shape of a woman, tall and poised, her posture unmistakably theatrical, as if waiting to deliver a line. Louise gasped and the vision collapsed. The curtain fell still. When Andrew returned later that night, Louise said nothing. She sat with her tea, staring into the steam, and told herself silence was safer. But the next morning Andrew confessed something unprompted. He had walked through the front door the previous evening and heard a voice singing faintly upstairs. A woman's voice, rich, trained, holding long notes as though in rehearsal. He had rushed up, believing Louise had left a record playing, but the rooms were silent. The couple began sleeping less. Nights were marked by muffled knocks along the corridor, the sound of a door latch lifting and then settling back. On more than one occasion, Andrew swore he had seen the door to the study slowly ease open, revealing only the still darkness within. They began closing off rooms they no longer dared to enter after dark, leaving whole sections of the house unoccupied, as though shrinking their lives to the kitchen and their bedroom alone. Yet the house resisted being ignored. In the early hours, Louise woke to the sound of applause, faint but unmistakable, like an audience clapping in a distant theater. It rose, built, then faded into silence. She clutched Andrew's arm, trembling. He had heard it too. The neighbors spoke more freely now that the couple had been living there for months. One elderly man who had known Diana personally told them, with a strange mix of pride and warning, she never stopped being an actress, even here at home. Rehearsed lines in every room, walked the house as if it were her stage. She wouldn't let go of it, not even toward the end. He paused, eyes distant, then added softly, some people can't leave an audience, you see. Not even in death. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. By the summer months, the house had started to dictate the rhythm of Andrew and Louise's lives. They avoided being alone in certain rooms, but even together they felt watched, as if their presence was a trespass. The house no longer felt like a possession, it felt like something that tolerated them. Louise, once proud of her taste in interior design, stopped rearranging the rooms. At first, she had tried to bring warmth. Fresh flowers on the dining table, framed photographs of holidays along the hallway. But she noticed how objects shifted when she wasn't looking. A photograph of her parents was often found tilted downward, face to the floor, while vases she had placed deliberately in sunlight were rotated toward shadow. It was as though the house rejected their imprint. She stopped trying, leaving the rooms bare, allowing the atmosphere of the past to reassert itself. Andrew had begun to withdraw into himself. His friends noticed it in his voice, the way he hesitated before committing to plans. He spent long evenings in the study, a room that unnerved him most but that he stubbornly refused to abandon. He said he wanted to own the space, but Louise would sometimes hear him arguing quietly, tensely with no one. When she asked, he brushed it off as work stress. But once, passing by the study door, she heard a clear exchange. Andrew's voice, low and defensive, followed by a softer, distinctly female reply. By the time she opened the door, Andrew sat alone at his desk, pale, with a glass of untouched whiskey at his side. The house itself was changing with the seasons in ways that felt unnatural. Dampness crept into corners where no leak could be found, leaving faint stains that resembled stage makeup, smudges powdery white against the darker paint. The air would grow suddenly cold in one part of the room, warm in another, as if spotlights invisible to the eye were being shifted across the space. Louise described it once, trembling. It feels like someone is staging a performance, and we are just sitting in the audience. One evening, they invited two close friends to stay, partly in hope of validation, partly in desperation for company. They didn't tell them outright about the disturbances, only hinted at strange noises. The friends laughed it off, enjoying dinner by candlelight in the dining room. But midway through the meal, the sound of heels clicking on the upstairs landing silenced all conversation. It wasn't subtle. It was sharp, distinct, deliberate, like a woman crossing a stage. The friends stared upward, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Then, without warning, one of the candles bent sideways, wax spilling onto the tablecloth, though no draft touched the room. The friends left early the next morning, offering polite excuses, but their eyes betrayed fear. Later, one texted Louise privately, "You need to bless that house. Something's wrong there. Truly wrong." Still, they stayed. Selling wasn't simple, the house was expensive, the market difficult, and neither Andrew nor Louise wanted to admit defeat. But the toll grew heavier. Louise began to dream in fragments of dialogue she didn't know, always spoken in a crisp, trained female voice. She woke in the mornings with the taste of chalky powder on her lips, like old stage makeup. Andrew grew prone to long silences, staring at the empty drawing room as though waiting for someone to enter. What unsettled Louise most was the feeling that the haunting wasn't random, it was directed. The sounds, the voices, the movements seemed calculated, purposeful, rehearsed even. And the focus, more and more, was narrowing on Andrew. By late summer, the house no longer felt like a dwelling at all, it felt like a stage, one where the script was being written around them without their consent. Andrew, once dismissive of superstition, had grown quieter, more inward. Louise noticed how he lingered in certain rooms, standing still for minutes at a time as though listening for cues. She would find him in the upstairs hallway at midnight, his face pale, his body rigid, eyes fixed on the shadows stretching across the floorboards. When she asked what he was doing, he would mutter something vague, just thinking. But his tone carried the brittle edge of someone concealing too much. The noises were no longer confined to footsteps or whispers. Whole rooms seemed to shift in sound and presence. One evening, while preparing supper, Louise heard the faint swell of strings violins, distant and thin as if an orchestra were warming up behind the walls. She dropped the knife she was using, listening intently. The music rose, faltered, then cut off with an abruptness that left her heart pounding. When Andrew came into the kitchen moments later, he asked casually, "Did you hear the overture?" His calmness chilled her more than the sound itself. Objects began to misbehave in ways too precise to be accidents. In the study, Andrew's desk lamp flickered not randomly but in rhythm, like the rise and fall of stage lights during a rehearsal. Louise's notebooks, stacked neatly on her nightstand, would be spread open across the bed when she returned from errands, each page marked with a faint pressure, as though someone had traced lines with invisible fingers. Once, she found a phrase written in dust on the mantelpiece: "The show must go on." She scrubbed it away in silence, but that night she couldn't sleep, feeling the words still lingering in the room. Andrew had begun speaking differently. His sentences grew clipped, rehearsed, his tone carrying the cadence of an actor projecting lines. He denied it when Louise confronted him, but there were times when his voice would slip into a register that wasn't quite his own, polished, theatrical, strangely feminine in rhythm. One night, she woke to hear him in the corridor, reciting something softly, like a soliloquy. When she pulled open the door, he was standing in the half-dark, his lips moving, eyes unfocused. He turned to her and whispered, "She's helping me remember." The neighbors noticed too. The woman across the street mentioned seeing lights in the upper windows late at night, long after the couple had gone to bed. "Looks like she's still holding rehearsals," the woman said with a nervous smile, as though unsure whether she was joking. Louise forced a laugh in reply, but inside she felt her stomach twist. Sleep became treacherous. Louise began experiencing what she thought were dreams, but they carried the texture of reality. She dreamt of being on stage, blinded by hot lights, hearing the murmur of an audience she could not see. A voice behind her would whisper instructions, sharp, commanding, impossible to disobey. She would wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, only to find the curtains swaying slightly as though someone had passed by them moments before. The house itself seemed to grow hungrier for their attention. Nights were punctuated by sudden bursts of sound. Applause rolling through the walls, a woman's laugh echoing faintly down the staircase, the unmistakable snap of a script being closed. Once, while Andrew was away for a conference, Louise tried to escape the weight of it by staying in a hotel. Yet even there she couldn't rest. At 3 a.m, her phone buzzed with a voicemail from their home number. When she pressed play, all she heard was the faint, deliberate clearing of a woman's throat, followed by silence. She returned home the next morning, shaken, only to find Andrew in the drawing room, seated stiffly in the armchair. He looked exhausted but strangely elated, as though he had just finished a performance. "She doesn't like you leaving," he said quietly, without turning his head. By autumn, the divide between Andrew and Louise was stark. She had grown withdrawn, gaunt from sleepless nights, while Andrew seemed almost possessed by a strange vitality, restless, intense. His speech laced with phrases she didn't recognize, as though he were carrying on two lives at once. The house no longer hinted at its presence. It declared it. Doors opened with theatrical precision. Curtains drew themselves back at the exact moment Louise entered the room, and voices always female, always trained, slid into the air without origin. They were not whispers anymore but full lines, sentences recited with conviction. Sometimes Shakespeare, sometimes fragments of plays Louise couldn't identify. Once, while standing in the hallway, she heard a clear voice call out, "Places, everyone," followed by the echo of footsteps rushing to positions only the ghost could see. The breaking point came one stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows, and the house groaned with the pressure of wind. Louise found Andrew in the study, dressed in an old velvet blazer he had discovered in one of the wardrobes left behind. He stood before the fireplace, shoulders back, chin lifted, as though facing an unseen audience. The flicker of the fire gave him a glow that was at once commanding and frightening. "Andrew," she whispered, "please stop this." But he raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes, normally warm, were glassy, transfixed. Then he began to speak, not to her, but through her, as if his body had become a vessel. The words poured out in a voice not his own. Precise, resonant, unmistakably that of an actress used to commanding the stage. Louise felt her knees weaken as she recognized the cadence, the sharp enunciation. It was Diana Rigg's voice or something impossibly close to it. The air thickened. Louise heard the swell of applause again, louder now, not distant but all around them, as though the walls themselves were filled with invisible spectators. The lamps flickered, shadows swayed, and for one unbearable instant Louise saw her husband doubled Andrew's body. Yes, but overlaying him was the translucent figure of a tall woman in a flowing gown. Her hair swept back, her presence regal and inescapable. Louise screamed his name, but Andrew's gaze was locked on some point beyond her, his arms outstretched in triumph. The show must go on. The voice rang, both his and not his, booming against the storm outside. The portrait of Diana Rigg that had once fallen in front of guests shuddered on the mantel and crashed to the floor again, the glass splintering across the rug. At that moment, every candle in the house flared, then extinguished at once, plunging the room into darkness. The applause roared, echoing, until it broke off with the same suddenness as before. When silence returned, Andrew collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Louise dragged him to the bedroom, trembling, unable to comprehend what she had witnessed. The next morning he remembered nothing. He spoke with a lightness, claiming he had simply fallen asleep in the study. But Louise saw the truth in his eyes. Something lingered there, a shadow of that other presence. They lasted only another month before selling the house at a loss, leaving behind furniture, belongings, even clothes. They never explained to the agents why they were leaving so abruptly, only muttering about needing a fresh start. Neighbors still report strange activity in that Hampstead townhouse. Lights in the upper windows flickering late at night, as if someone were rehearsing. Curtains swaying though the air outside is still. And sometimes, if you walk past on a quiet evening, you might hear it too. The faint swell of applause, rising from nowhere, celebrating a performance that never truly ends. The house, they say, still belongs to Diana Rigg. And like any great actress, she refuses to leave the stage before the final bow. In the weeks after they left, Louise would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, certain she had heard the faint click of heels against wood, or the rustle of heavy curtains being drawn. Even in their new, modern flat with clean white walls and no history behind it, she felt echoes following her. Once, unpacking boxes, she discovered the old velvet blazer Andrew had worn that stormy night. She was sure they had abandoned it in Hampstead, but here it was, folded neatly, carrying that faint perfume of powder and violets. She threw it away the same day, though for weeks she swore she could still smell it in their bedroom. Andrew changed too. He became uneasy in crowds, his eyes darting toward the shadows between people, as if he expected someone to step forward and begin reciting. He avoided theaters entirely, though he had once loved them. And sometimes, in moments when his guard slipped, Louise would catch him mouthing words silently, his lips forming lines as though rehearsing a role no one had asked him to play. The house itself never stayed empty for long. London real estate was too valuable. Another family moved in young, ambitious, delighted by the history of the place. But the neighbors noted how quickly the curtains began to twitch at odd hours again, how laughter that wasn't theirs echoed faintly in the evenings. The house endures, standing quietly on its leafy street, elegant and dignified on the outside. Yet those who live nearby will tell you that if you pause too long at the gates after dark, you may catch it. The slow rise of unseen voices, a woman's sharp, commanding tone, and finally, the unmistakable roar of an audience applauding a performance that never ends. The final curtain never falls there. Not in Diana Rigg's house. Would you spend a night here? Comment below. Which house should I do next?